Hello, this is Matt Hester with Dimensional Nomad Games, and we're going to be talking about some of my favorite spoiled cards for Hour of Devastation. We're only going to cover some of the cards rather than doing a full coverage of the set. I plan on doing the full coverage for the set after the pre-release once all the cards are released. That way we can go through card by card, talk about how they'll affect Commander, and what I feel about them, probably which decks I'm gonna end up putting them in, and things like that. In this case, I just picked two from each of the categories, uh, each of the colors, multicolor, land, and artifact. So we'll go ahead and talk about those today, and then later on we'll do a more in-depth look. All right, so let's go ahead and just get straight into the cards. So the first card I want to talk about, we're going to look at the artifacts. So Mirage Mir is an artifact for 3 mana that says for 2, Mirage Mir becomes a copy of target artifact, creature, enchantment, or land until end of turn. Basically, it can become a copy of any permanent except for planeswalkers. Now that's pretty crazy, especially for Commander. I mean, there are so many things that you want to have another copy of, even if it's just for a turn. Being able to copy things like Cabal Coffers for a turn, or you know, some crazy blocker you need, something with static abilities or activated abilities. Now it's unlike something like Thespian Stage where it copies a thing and retains the ability because it changes back at end of turn, but it's still a really really effective ability. Personally, I think it'd be fun to copy something like Paradox Haze just to get an additional upkeep. So you'd end up with 3 upkeeps or 4 if you copy it, and then anyway, I can definitely see this being in a lot of decks. So that is something you're definitely going to see. The other artifact that I picked was God Pharaoh's Gift. For 7 mana, you get an artifact that says, at the beginning of combat on your turn, you may exile a creature card from your graveyard. If you do, create a token that's a copy of that card, except it's a 4/4 black zombie. It gains haste until end of turn. Now, I can see this being used in all kinds of decks, um, especially ones that aren't normally reanimator decks. Now, with reanimation decks, normally they want the creature card itself being put back into play because that is they want to be able to do it multiple times, whereas this is only a one of. However, because it's a token and it stays in play natively, you can copy it with populate effects. So that's something to keep in mind. I can definitely see this being used in something like Risk the Redeemed or a Trostani deck, which already have built in copy mechanics with them. So definitely something to look out for. Nothing quite like playing Trostani and then playing an Avenger of Zendikar, sacking it to an ability, making a copy of it, populating, making another copy of it, populating again, making another copy. You see where I'm going with that. So definitely a lot of ways you can use and abuse God Pharaoh's Gift. All right, so now moving on to black, we have Razaketh the Foul-Blooded. For 5 black, 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 you get an 8/8 legendary creature demon. The creature has flying, trample, and best of all, pay 2 life, sacrifice another creature. Search your library for a card and put that card into your hand, then shuffle your library. The card has a built-in tutor effect. The only downside is that it's sacrifice another creature, so it can't sacrifice itself, which is both a good side and a bad side. So let's say somebody temporarily steals it, they can't use its own ability to sacrifice itself. Um, But other than that, it's going to be a great addition to a lot of decks. Reanimation decks are going to be absolutely bonkers with this, but I can see it used in all kinds of builds that run black. I mean, repeatable tutor is pretty strong, especially in Commander. I don't think he'll be a commander in and of himself. Definitely one of the 1 of 99. But then again, token build, 8 mana is a pretty hefty price for a commander, but then again, people also run Avacyn as a commander in mono white with no ramp, so who knows? The other black card that I think is really interesting to look at is Torment of Hailfire. It's black, black, and X for a sorcery that says repeat the following process X times. Each opponent loses 3 life unless that player sacrifices a non-land permanent or discards a card. Now, the thing that's key on this one is that it's repeat the process X times. So even if X is 0, you still get the process one time. Um, you just don't get additional copies. So for 2 black, you can have someone lose 3 life unless they sack a permanent or discard a card. Now, with the right situations, that can be pretty gate, but you'll probably see this in decks that run things like Exsanguinate because they've got a bunch of mana anyway. Because if you put like 5 into X, that's a ton of mana, a ton of triggers on this one, because then you get 6 uses out of this, where they're either each time either discarding, sacking, or losing life. So a lot of good combos, and I just think it's an interesting flavor on the card. All right, so the next card we're going to look at, we're moving on to blue, and we have Fraying Sanity. For 2 and 1 blue, you get an enchantment or a curse that says enchant player. At the beginning of each end step, enchanted player puts the top X cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard, where X is the number of cards put into that graveyard from anywhere this turn. Now, what makes this special is it doesn't matter what effect put those cards into the graveyard by its initially. It could be the player discarding a card, something dying, cycling, or of course, general mill effects. Now, the only downside is that it doesn't do anything on its own. So if nothing hit the graveyard, then nothing more will hit the graveyard. Then again, you can play this, hit them with Traumatize, which mills half their deck, and then at the end of turn, they mill the other half of their deck. So that's pretty strong. Traumatize is 3 and blue, blue. So for a total of 8 mana, you completely mill out their deck, unless they've got an Eldrazi that reshuffles or all the other normal anti-mill cards. But still, definitely going to have a place in mill strategies, but it could also have one in board wipe strategies. You can also, I mean, you maybe could do self mill if you're doing like a dread strategy or reanimation strategy, but more than likely you'll see it in mill decks. It's still going to be fun. The other blue card that I thought was really interesting is Swarm Intelligence. For 6 and 1 blue, you get an enchantment that says, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you may copy that spell. You may choose new targets for that copy. That's kind of awesome. It's a free Mirari for all of your instants and sorceries. Now, Mirari is an artifact that costs 5, and then the ability is pay 3, copy your instant or sorcery. So already this is a better mana investment than Mirari at 7 mana versus 5 plus 3, which is 8. Plus, you then don't have to keep paying 3 for all the other abilities. There's lots of interesting decks that you can use it with. Yeah, at 7 mana, it's a little bit slow for some decks, but the decks that would already run Mirari, this is way more mana efficient. I can see it in burn decks, in mill decks, drawing decks. I mean, there's a lot of decks that this could really be fun to. Nekusar could have this. It's a bit of an investment for Nekusar, but that would just be crazy. Double wheels every time you wheel. Seems like fun to me. I'm really interested to see how people play this, what they do with it. Another thought would be like in the Simic deck, just doubling all of your mana ramp spells, because you're going to have 7 mana turn 3 or turn 4 anyway, and then being able to double all those extra spells that you've been casting the rest of the turn would be awesome. All right, now we're going to move on to green. The first green card I have on here is Hour of Promise. For 4 and a green, you get a sorcery that says, search your library for up to 2 land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. Then, if you control 3 or more deserts, create 2 2/2 black zombie creature tokens. It's always fun to search for lands. The best part is it just says land, doesn't say basic land. So if you're playing something like green black, you can go get Urborg and Cabal Coffers, If you're playing a combo like green white pillow fort or green white blue pillow fort, you can go get things like propaganda and ghostly prison. Sorry, not the lands, the mystifying maze and maze of Ith. Sorry, got my pillow forts mixed up. Now the second part of it, where if you control 3 or more deserts, you create two zombies. I see that being triggered less until we get more deserts, even though there's like 12 or 13 deserts already released for the set for Hour of Devastation. But I don't see all of them as viable for Commander, but that's something we'll look at later when we do a full set review. But it's that first one. It's 5 mana to go get any 2 lands. Put them on, yeah, puts them on the battlefield tapped, but unlike something like Tempt with Discovery, you're not sharing any of those land drops with any of your opponents. So there's a couple of different ways to go because Tempt with Discovery is, I believe, 3 and a green, lets you get a land, and then allow your opponents to get a land, and then if any of them get a land, you get an additional land. But again, this is one-sided, puts them on a battlefield, and if you're building an interesting deck with deserts, maybe you'll get some zombies. All right, let's move on to the next card, which is the other green card, which is the Magus of the Crucible. What I mean is Ramunap Excavator. So for 2 and a green, you get a 2/3 creature Naga cleric that says you may play land cards from your graveyard. Basically, it's Crucible of Worlds on a creature, which is fantastic. They really missed the ball here. They should have called it Magus of the Crucible, but I mean, you get what you need out of it. So, I mean, flavor loss, but at least we get a creature that does another Crucible effect. It's in the card that usually is sacking lands, so you're going to see this in Titania, Omnath, Angry Omnath, and a bunch of other decks. All right, so now we're going to move on to the land. So the first land I want to talk about is Endless Sands, which is a land desert. It has tap, add waste to your mana pool. 2 and a tap, exile target creature you control. 4 and tap, sacrifice Endless Sands, return each creature card exiled with Endless Sands to the battlefield under its owner's control. Basically, it's a safe haven with a better trigger mechanic. Instead of only triggering during your upkeep, you can, if you've got it untapped, you can trigger it at any time. Now, the only downside is that it says return the creatures to its owner's control. So if you were using it for an exile strategy from stolen creatures, unfortunately your opponents would get them back. But then again, just being able to exile the creatures at any time that you stole from your opponents, you could use this in red theft, blue temporary theft. You can also exile your own creatures in response to board wipes. So this card has a lot of utility on it. So I can definitely see this. You'll see this in the same decks that already run Safe Haven, but I can see this being in a lot of other strategies just as a one-off. Or maybe a sideboard card against people who run a lot of board wipes. All right, now the other land that I picked is Hipnewivulet. It's a land desert. It's one of a cycle, so there's one for each color. I just picked the blue one because I think of the 5 deserts in this particular cycle, it has the strongest mechanics. So let's take a look at the card. We have tap, add waste to your mana pool. Tap, pay 1 life, add blue to your mana pool. Pay 1 blue and 1 tap, sacrifice a desert. Target player puts the top 4 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. So you get your generic mana, you get the possibility of getting a blue mana out of a desert. I'm not sure how that works, but you know. But more importantly, you have a repeatable, possibly, mill effect built into a land. Now it can sacrifice itself, or it can sacrifice a desert. So if you decide to go swing wide with all of those desert cards, this would definitely get it. It's probably one of the best mana costed for the abilities out of the cycle, but again, we'll take a look at that more when we get into the full set review. I just thought it was the best of the cycle. All right, now let's look at the multicolor cards. Now the first one I picked was River Hoopoe, Hoopoe. Not sure how to pronounce that, but let's just go with Hoopoe. Hoopoe? Like a hippo with a O? Anyway, for a green and a blue, you get a 1/3 creature bird with flying, and more importantly, an ability that says for 3, a green and a blue, you gain 2 life and draw a card. Yes, it's 5 to draw a card and gain 2 life, but green blue, how hard is it to get 5 mana? It's a pretty decent body for 2 mana, a 1/3 flying, and it's not hard to cheapen the effects. You're running blue, you might be running training grounds anyway, so for 3 mana, you gain 2 life and draw a card. Pretty decent effect. It's a bird. Probably not going to be used in bird tribal, but it's definitely one that just kind of tickles my fancy and is amusing at the same time. The other multicolor card is Unraveling Mummy. So for 1, a white, and a black, you get a 2/3 creature zombie with 2 different abilities. The first one is for 1 and a white, target attacking zombie gains lifelink until end of turn. And for 1 and a black, target attacking zombie gains death touch until end of turn. Zombie Tribal is definitely getting a lot more love in this set, I'm thinking, especially with the new Eternalize effect, returning all those creatures as zombies. Same with Amonkhet's and the Embalm, returning all those creatures as zombie. You have black-white zombies. You probably see black-white-blue zombies. So this, especially being able to just give lifelink at any time, is a great effect. Plus the sneaky death touch, so people are already going to be looking at your zombies like, which of these do I want to block? Or am I going to take it? So definitely it's fun to play with things in combat. All right, now let's take a look at the red cards. Now the first red card we're going to look at is Neheb the Eternal. So we had the black-red Neheb in Amonkhet. This is just him learning and getting rid of his black side. Now he's mono red. So for 3 red red, you get a 4/6 legendary creature, Zombie Minotaur Warrior. I think this is one of the only mono red zombies in Magic. Now his abilities are Afflict 3, which says whenever this creature becomes blocked, a defending player loses 3 life. And then at the beginning of your post-combat main phase, add red to your mana pool for each 1 life your opponents have lost this turn. Now that's pretty crazy. There's all kinds of things that can happen with this. You might see not an overrun, a aggravated assault strategy, maybe a burn strategy, because it's not just combat damage that triggers the bonus red. It's just for each life your opponents have lost this turn. He's definitely going to be strong in things like Rakdos, even just as a commander. Make him into a burn deck, make him into a combat shenanigans deck. Lots of different ways you can go with this. Now, Zombie Minotaur Warrior, I mean, what's funny is you can also run him with the original Neheb. So there's lots of different ways you can run him. I just think that everything about this card has some use, so I think it'll be really fun. I'm curious to see what people do with him. I'd really like to see some burn decks. Not a lot of burn decks in Commander because it's hard to burn down 3 other people if you're playing in the normal multiplayer pods. All right, and then the other red card is Wildfire Eternal. So for 3 and a red, you get a 1/4 creature, zombie, jackal, cleric. Oh, look, another mono red zombie. It's got Afflict 4. So remember, whenever this creature becomes blocked, defending player loses 4 life. So he's a 1/4 that if they block him, they lose 4 life. But whenever Wildfire Eternal attacks and isn't blocked, you may cast an instant or sorcery from your hand without paying its mana cost. So they're going to be looking at this like, yeah, he's a 1/4 and I can take 1. But if I take 1, they're going to cast a free instant or sorcery. But if I block it, I lose 4. So they're going to be juggling that and trying to figure out where they're going to go with that. So it'll be interesting to see how people end up playing around this, especially if you end up with mono red zombie tribal with Naheb as your red burn commander. So I'm looking forward to seeing how people play with it. All right, now moving on to white, we have Jarrow with eyes open. For 3 white white, you get a 4/3 legendary creature, human warrior. He has vigilance, and when Jarrow with eyes open enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a planeswalker card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. And also, if a source would deal damage to a planeswalker you control, prevent one of that damage. This is going to be crazy for all of your Super Friends decks, or even decks that just run even a few planeswalkers. Now he's white, so you're not going to see him in dedicated decks to like Nicobolas, but you will see him in Super Friends, as I mentioned earlier, or the Gideon builds that people were running around for a while. Run him as your commander and just go get Gideon all day long. But he's a Planeswalker tutor in mono white, and the better part is he prevents the damage from your Planeswalker. So no poking down your Planeswalkers anymore. They'd have to do a lot more than try and poke. All right, now the other white card that's going to be absolutely bonkers in Commander is Solemnity. For 2 and a white, you get an enchantment that says players can't get counters. Counters can't be put on artifacts, creatures, enchantments, or lands. Pretty much the only things that can get counters are suspend cards and planeswalkers. And that is crazy for Commander, especially with how popular Atraxa is right now. Um, just various infect commanders. Hapatra gets completely hosed. Gave, a lot of artifact um, things. So you like the Machias build, you don't get Triskelion. Additionally, it just makes a whole bunch of other abilities completely crazy, like um, cumulative upkeep doesn't progress because you're not adding any more age counters to those cards. So that's going to be bonkers. So this card has the potential to just break a whole lot of things. Now, it's not overpowered in and of itself because one, it's on enchantment, which is one of the easiest things to kill. Lots of people run enchantment removal already in the format. Plus, it's a lot of exiling, mostly because people were trying to exile gods, but it's pretty crazy. I'm really looking forward to seeing what decks just get completely wrecked by this. I already know my own decks. I've got an Atraxa deck for Hydras, Atraxa decks for Energy. Like Marin's not going to get any counters on it. It hits my Brea. It hits just completely hoses Animar. So there's a lot of decks that this is really going to throw a wrench into. So you might see, well, you probably will see, depending on everybody's meta, an increase in enchantment removal in the format. So it'll be interesting to see the ripples that this card does. Um, and I think that's all the cards. So thank you for stopping by. Hope you enjoyed my little preview of Hour of Devastation. And I look forward to talking about the complete set once it's out.